Hello and welcome along. So I'm back. There was a bit of a gap from the last video I made, not too big, but I was supposed to make one last week. I was extremely ill for about a week, spent the week in bed, and that is why Nurgle is my least favourite Chaos God, because there is no such thing as a blessing of Nurgle. It's always bad. I don't want to get ill again. Leave me alone. Now moving on. Now you might have noticed I have kept the beard. Thank you for the responses. So I'm going to try and do something with it. I might maybe grow out here, or like down here. I'll make a big square beard. I don't know, but I am keeping it. That's the main thing for now, at least. But it does mean I do need to start taking care of it. So I've got to start oiling it and all the other things that beardy people do. If you have experience with beards, let me know what you do. So moving on to today's video, we're going to look at the Primarchs and how effective they were at stopping the Heresy. Now, you would think, because a Primarch is such an incredible being, that the Emperor put so much work into creating the individuals, that they would have had quite a significant positive effect on the Heresy, wouldn't you? You'd think that they were the main reasons the Heresy failed. Well, let's take a closer look at each individual and see what they achieved during the Heresy. So, by far the least effective of any of the Loyalist Primarchs during the Heresy, Ferrus Manus. Well, he did die pretty much straight away. So he couldn't do anything. But when he was alive, he completely screwed over the Imperium's ability to resist the Heresy by losing 3 legions extremely quickly. So, of course, he was fooled into a trap at turn 5, losing the best part of the Raven Guard Salamanders and his own legion. And there's really no excuse for this. It was almost entirely his own fault. He was reckless. He didn't listen to those around him. He ignored the other Primarch. He was almost singularly at fault for the loss of 3 legions. You can't do much worse than that, although a few will try. So yes, he is the least effective, and because he died there, he couldn't do anything else after that to redeem that, so he has no redeeming qualities. He's done. I should add, Shadrach Medusan, one of his sons, did go some way to redeeming his father, but that was all on Shadrach. Now, he was an incredible war leader of elements of the so-called Shattered Legions, those that survived Discern 5. He did a lot to delay the Heresy. In fact, was one of the most important figures in delaying the Heresy, in delaying the progress of the Heresy, and deserves a huge amount of credit for his work. But obviously, that was all him. It was nothing to do with his father, Ferrus Manus. And in fact, Ferrus Manus probably would have disapproved of the various methods that Shadrach used of incorporating tactics and units from other legions and so on. So, sorry, Ferrus, you're still the worst. Next, well, it's our old friend, the great Leman Russ. So Russ effectively loses the Imperium 2 legions, his own legion and the Thousand Sons, when he attacks Prospero, falling into a very obvious trap laid by Horus, tricked, manipulated, but into doing something he really wanted to do anyway. Now, he doesn't lose the entirety of his legion at the burning of Prospero, but it effectively leads them being so vulnerable that they never recover, and they suffer disaster after disaster until they are completely depleted. He has no positive effect on the Heresy at all, really. You could argue that his wounding of Horus does cause some delay in Horus's plans, in the general plans of the traitors pursuing the Heresy, and it leads to some infighting and so on. Actually, it really leads to Horus coming out of it more committed to chaos and actually fully embracing chaos, rather than him going the other way and turning back towards the Imperium. So yeah, Russ is really only beaten in his incompetence by Ferrus Manus, who lost 3 legions, whereas Russ only lost 2. Oh, of course, also, Russ was a leading voice in the elimination of Psykers in the Imperial military in the lead up to the Heresy, which made the Imperium much more vulnerable to attacks by chaos, etc. So another area where he actively weakens the Imperium in its ability to fight the traitors. So next, the Lion. Well, of course, the Lion does almost nothing during the Heresy, and almost nothing positive during the Heresy. What he does do is, of course, drive a massive wedge through his own legion, causing them to divide into 2 and to fight each other to the death, resulting in the effective loss of most of his legion, and therefore losing the Imperium an entire Space Marine legion through most of the Heresy. Now, he does have one redeeming quality in that he does tie up the Night Lords during the Thramas Crusade for several years, which obviously helps the Loyalists because they don't have to deal with the full force of the Night Lords for that time. So that is a positive. He, of course, then joins Imperius Secundus with Guilliman and Sanguinius, where he becomes the de facto military leader of the combined forces and proceeds to waste that entire force pursuing his personal vendetta against Kurz. Again, achieves nothing in fighting the Heresy. After that, he escapes Imperium Secundus through the Broomstorm and then has to go and fight his own civil war amongst the Dark Angels, so does nothing to help fight the Heresy. So yeah, very poor, but not quite as bad as the previous two because he only loses one legion effectively. Next, we're getting to the more neutral ground. So Corax. Well, of course, he does lose his legion at Isstvan 5, but that's not really his fault at all. That is all down to Manus, and he does try to help Manus. He tries to stop the disaster from happening, but he can't really do that. He does manage to keep some of his legion alive and get them off of Isstvan 5, so that's actually to his credit. He then launches an attempt at rebuilding his legion, which of course fails because the Alpha Legion intervene. So he is outmaneuvered by the Alpha Legion, which doesn't go in his credit, but after that he does lead some useful kind of guerrilla warfare action that does lead to some delays and problems for the traitors. So he has an overall relatively neutral but maybe slightly positive effect. Now, eventually, near the end of the Heresy, he rescues Russ from certain death at the hands of the Sons of Horus, which could be seen as a positive, but it's not really. Neither of them do anything after that anyway, fighting the Heresy, so it has no effect on the Heresy. So overall, his effect is slightly positive at best. So next, Dorn. Well, he does almost nothing, to be honest, to fight the Heresy. You might be thinking, what? Well, surely Dorn's a major player. He does a huge amount, doesn't he? Well, does he? He sits in Terra, telling people what to do, but actually achieving nothing. He builds up the defences of Terra, yes, but those defences are actually reasonably easily overcome by the traitors. He basically makes the Imperial forces a sitting duck just waiting to be destroyed. He fails on a strategic level. He fails on a tactical level. He becomes obsessed with his battle with Alfarius and almost throws it all away at the Battle of Pluto, where he thinks he's outmaneuvering Alfarius, when actually he's being outmaneuvered. So obviously with Alfarius, everything is a trap and a trap and a trap. And he eventually gets Dorn exactly where he wants him to be, and should have won the Heresy really at that point, killing Dorn and defeating the defences of Terra before Horus got anywhere near Terra. But the Emperor intervenes and Alfarius dies, probably. And Dorn survives, but that was actually a massive mistake on Dorn's part, thinking he could outmaneuver Alfarius. And in fact, Alfarius proves he's better at them on every level, both individually and at a tactical and strategic level. And Dorn comes out of it learning nothing and carries on with his own dogmatic way of war, where he refuses to listen to his brothers who are more capable, such as Sanguinius and the Khan, who constantly urge him to change his tactics in his defense of Terra, but he refuses. Overall, his impact on the Heresy is neutral at best. Obviously, by building up the defenses of Terra, it does slow down the conquest of Terra, but it really has nothing to do with the traitors losing. And even after the Heresy, he still doesn't learn his lesson. He goes and tries to defeat Perturabo to prove his superiority and gets his ass handed to him again, losing the rest of his legion effectively. So he's at best neutral. In fact, I'm tempted to put him below Corax, but then Corax also does throw away huge numbers of resources in his weird guilt era, where he likes to sacrifice all his human allies in an attempt to punish them for coming to rescue him, or whatever his other weird motivations are going on in his head, where he pushes everyone away from him during the Heresy. But between the two of them, actually, they're both at best neutral. Next, Vulkan. Well, here's someone who actually has a positive impact, but it's not a very big one. Unfortunately for Vulkan, he's captured, tortured, killed, stays dead for quite a long time, eventually gets brought back to life, but gets sent on a side quest by the Emperor to retrieve some artifacts that the Emperor seems to actually use. He then gets stuck down in the dungeon, waiting to guard the throne room from any incursions by Chaos through the rifts opened up by Magnus's entry into the palace. So he doesn't do much because he never really has a chance to do much. But on the other hand, he doesn't do anything wrong. Like, he has no negative effect on the Heresy. He just doesn't have a great deal of positive effect on the Heresy. He doesn't really do much to slow down the Heresy, or to stop it, or to damage the traitor in any really significant way. But he does do some useful things, particularly in the dungeons, on his quest for the Emperor, which never really gets explained fully. But he is doing something useful, probably. So next I've put Guilliman. Now, He does effectively lose 2 legions worth of troops at Calth, where he's caught out by the word bearers, but that's hard to put it all on him. I mean, at that stage, the heresy hasn't even started, and it's not an obvious trap in the way that Isfahan 5 was. And I would give Guilliman some leeway here. I don't think he was as obviously caught in a trap as Manus was, or as easily tricked as Russ was. So I'm not going to put all the weight of losing the best part of 200,000 Ultramarines on him. I think, though, he does bear some responsibility for that. He is a bit too naive when going into that situation. You know, everybody in the Imperium knows how much he's hated by the word-bearers and by Lorgar, and to put himself in such an exposed position so openly in his naive want for Lorgar to like him does seem a bit silly for a super being with, with his level of intellect and capability of predicting, events based on, analysing on logic and reason and so on. So I don't know, I'm a bit over 50-50 on that, how much blame he carries for Calth. Now, after that, of course, he gets stuck in Imperium Secundus, where he rebuilds the Imperium because he thinks the Emperor's dead, but he doesn't really do much rebuilding, and frankly, he wastes the resources of the Imperium Secundus, which is 3 legions worth, well, the best part of, and doing very little, basically chasing Angron and Lorgar around, but actually not achieving much. I would say expending more resources than it's worth. He lets the Lion get away with a lot, who lies to him all the time and misuses the military of the Imperium Secundus to pursue his own vendetta against Kurz. Doesn't really achieve much. He does very little to get out past the Runestorm, which is holding them there, and in the end it takes Sanguinius to get them out. So he doesn't really do much, but once he does get his forces through the Runestorm, he then becomes the biggest thorn in Horus's side in terms of pursuing and delaying and attacking the traitor forces from behind so that they can't commit fully to an attack on Terra, and forces their hand somewhat in the timetable for invading Terra, because they have to consider that there's this growing force behind them that's eating up all of the territories that they're abandoning to focus their forces on the attack on Terra. So that does cause a considerable amount of problems for the traitors. If he hadn't been there, if he'd done what the Lion had done and got through the Runestorm and then disappeared to fight his own civil war, then the traitors would have had a very easy time conquering Terra, because they could have done it all in their own time. So he does have a considerable positive impact at that point, and that's why he's so far up the list. So despite a very slow start, he does get 3rd place. So 2nd place goes to the Khan. Now, the Khan was almost entirely positive in his impact on the heresy. He was trying his best throughout the heresy to delay the traitors. He was instrumental, really, in the early years in fighting against the traitors, and was their main drain of resources of the traitors. Now, only Shadrach Medusan was really launching any kind of significant military defense against the traitors at this point, and so the White Scars under the Khan are the main enemy of the heresy during probably the entire first half of the heresy. There's really almost no one else left. You've basically got Russ going around wasting his resources all over the place. You've got Sanguinius, Guilliman, and the Lion trapped behind the Runestorm, and then you've got Dorn holding back all of his forces on Terra. So the traitors are effectively free to take over the galaxy with very little standing in their way, except for this hit-and-run campaign by Shadrach Medusan, which is annoying to them, and an even smaller hit-and-run campaign by Corax. But the White Scars are actually presenting a genuinely effective and quite powerful military opposition to them. So although they again use hit and run tactics, they're doing it on a much larger scale, which does consume a considerable amount of the traitors' resources and focus. And so the Khan does more than anyone else during this period to delay the heresy. He's not got any possibility of defeating the heresy because he just doesn't have the numbers. He is the main reason that those 3 legions stuck behind the Runestorm can even intervene at all when they come out, because the heresy is still happening, because it's still happening because of his actions of slowing everything down. So he does have a considerable positive impact on the course of the heresy. Now, when he does get back to Terra, he then helps in defending Terra itself. He constantly gives Dorn advice. Dorn obviously ignores, but is good advice. He helps defend the human population of Terra, which Dorn doesn't want to do. And for all those reasons, I give him 2nd place. So 1st place, it goes to Sanguinius. Why? Well, First of all, you'll notice that the only other Primarchs that really had much of a positive impact on the Heresy were Guilliman and the Khan. And the only reason that Guilliman can do what he does in pursuing the traitors once they're out of the Runestorm is because Sanguinius gets him out of the Runestorm. They kind of work together, him and Guilliman and the line, but really it's mostly Sanguinius that's doing the work to get them out of the Runestorm. And without him, they won't get out. Once they're out, he goes back to Terra. And there, again, like the Khan, he helps greatly in defending Terra, but he helps much more than the Khan. He individually inspires the population of Terra to resist. He destroys single-handedly several Titans. He saves the Khan's life from the Death Guard. He gives great advice to Dorn, who ignores him. He just generally does more than anybody else. He could do a lot more if Dorn would have just stepped down and give Sanguinius command, but he holds on to the historical position of being the Praetorian of Terra, which the Emperor had given him, but his very dogmatic and limited grasp of strategy and war means that he can only think about reinforcing the defences and holding on longer and longer and longer until Guilliman rescues them from behind, which is a very bad tactic. And of course, the only reason Guilliman can potentially rescue them from behind is because Sanguinius got him out of the Runestorm. He also leads a massive campaign at Beta Garman where he causes a significant damage to the Heresy. In fact, more damage to the traitors than any other campaign during the Heresy, and holds them back, slows them down enough to get Terra even better prepared for the inevitable invasion. And even before all of this, at the very beginning of the Heresy, he has to fight his own campaign at the beginning where Horus has engineered a situation for him to be defeated and his legion to be turned to chaos. In the Cygnus campaign, where he could have done what Ferrus Manus did or Russ did or what Guilliman did, and been humiliated and lost enormous numbers of troops to the enemy and undermined the capability of the Imperium to fight back, but he doesn't. He wins his campaign successfully with minimal losses and gets the Blood Angels out. And he arrives in Imperius Secundus, where Guilliman then just delays them for years doing nothing. So again, his impact is positive throughout. Yeah, he probably could have done more in Imperius Secundus to push the others to get back to the Imperium, and instead of just accepting that the Emperor was dead and that they couldn't do anything. And he kind of wallows in a lot of guilt and so on at this point, not really taking the bull by the horns and letting Guilliman and the Lion really lead decision-making, where he only intervenes when they can't agree. That's really the only accusation you can lie against him. Other than that, he is obviously by far the most effective of the Loyalist Primarchs in fighting the Heresy. So, thank you very much for listening. If you disagree or you have something else to add, please put it in the comments. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.